Exclamation point.
Shirley Plantation is located in the coastal plains region of Virginia, right by the James River. It's the oldest plantation in America and the oldest family-run business, too.
I'm Alfonso.
I'm Frank.
And I'm Brad.
And I'm David.
And we're Virginia Trekkers. Today we're visiting Shirley Plantation. It was Virginia's first plantation built in 1613.
And we're in the coastal plain region of Virginia. There's over 700 acres of land here, and over just about half of it is still farmed today.
So let's go explore this colonial plantation. Come on!
Let's go!
Boys and girls, behind me is the Shirley Plantation House, also known as the Great House. It has a huge amount of significance. We're going to talk more about it. This is the back part. On the very top, you're going to see a pineapple, and we're going to zoom in on that pineapple. This is a symbol of welcome. So whenever you see these pineapple structures, it means welcome. And this house was about welcome because it served as a hospital in the Civil War, and it's not just for the Confederates but for the Union. And Dave's going to talk a little bit about it.
In third grade, you learned about columns. What kind of columns are that on the house over there? Is it Doric, Ionic, or Corinthian? And if you look up at the top, you can tell that these are Doric columns, plain at the top.
Hey boys and girls, this is Brad. We are in a place that's called Shirley's Kitchen, which means we're in the actual kitchen building here at Shirley Plantation. The kitchen building that we're in right now is actually separate from the main house. The reason why it was separate is because they had fears of fires, and they also had odors from cooking, and the kitchen staff and the main cook always worked in here and brought the food to the families.
And at first the kitchen was, people who worked in the kitchen were indentured servants, and then later on they were slaves. And usually the morning meal would be made of leftovers from the night before, and their biggest meal was lunch. And it was served around 2 o'clock, and they had things like meat, vegetables, and dessert. There was always dessert. And then for dinner it was a little bit lighter, they just had leftovers, again.
And you might be asking yourself, well, where did they get the meat from? Well, they had cattle, they had sheep, and they had hogs. And hogs were a big source of meat. What they would do is eat the meat from the hog and then store the leftover meat.
And they would grow all their own vegetables right here on Shirley Plantation.
Everybody, welcome to the root cellar. Now the root cellar that you see behind me was not built to be a root cellar. There used to be a building right here on top of this. And the buildings back then used to burn down because the only light source was fire. And, you know, fire, candles will easily burn down buildings. But the root cellar here was used before refrigeration, and they used to keep apples, turnips, potatoes, and other produce items and food they didn't want to spoil underground because the earth is insulated and keeps things a little bit cooler. So a tragedy turned into a refrigerator.
Boys and girls, here's the ice house. When they had food, they were going to need, just like we have refrigerators, they need to keep their food from spoiling as well. But they did a little bit differently. Here you see their building made of brick, and they had what we call the ice house, and they would go to the ponds and they would cut out like blocked ice from the ponds, and then they transport them back. They would have to make several trips, and they would bring tons of ice in. They'd take the ice and they store it inside this area. It's a little bit dark, and they've got railings because it's very deep, and I don't want to fall way down in there. But they would stack all those blocks of ice right in here, and then there's a vent that goes inside the building. So all the cold air goes inside of the ice house building, keeping all the food refrigerated.
Hey boys and girls, here we are in the vineyard. This is where they grow the grapes. And they grew the vines so that they came over the roof so you could actually just pull grapes out of the roof. And they used the grapes to make drinks. They didn't have all the same drinks that you all have, sodas and Kool-Aid. They had the basics like milk, water, and drinks made of grapes and grain.
And all of these flower bed areas and the crops were strategically placed because of the position of the sun. Because some places get more sun in the morning, some more in the afternoon, And so some plants will grow better because remember, you need those basic things, sunlight and water and good soil. So as we go around, you'll see certain plants being placed in certain areas for that reason. Right, Dave?
That's right, Alfonso.
Hey boys and girls, here I am in the smokehouse. Smokehouse is very important. Back in the 17th, 18th century, the pork was a very important staple in everybody's diet. And what they did to cure it is they put it here and they rub it with salt and the smoke inside. That's how they would preserve the meat.
They had a smoking fire here. They took different types of woods to add different flavors. And then they would hang meat up in the ceiling, and the smoke would help preserve the meat. They didn't have refrigerators, so this was one way, using smoke, salt, and spices to preserve their meat.
Boys and girls, here in Shirley Plantation, you're going to see a lot of cool animals.
You're going to see some wild animals and some tame animals. Let's see which ones of these you can find at Shirley Plantation.
Back then, they used animals as a resource. Resources for food, whether they ate the animals themselves as food, or they used in the case of the chickens in my background, they used the eggs. Then you have the milk, or you have horses used for transportation and for their farms to pull the plows. So animals was a huge resource to help them perform their everyday tasks and make life a little bit easier and help them survive.
So boys and girls, since these animals were used as food sources, you really wouldn't want to get to know them. Like, you probably wouldn't name them because you never know, maybe tomorrow, little Betsy would be your breakfast. And Vegan Frank does not like that.
And Vegan Frank would not have survived.
That is cool. I see it. I have it. That right there, boys and girls, is a bald eagle, your national bird.
Be very quiet. We have a wild animal. It's a rabbit. Remember, wild, the animals take care of themselves. Tame, we have to take care of the animals. Now, some people do have rabbits as pets, but they're really not.
Right behind me you see the stable, and yes, you keep horses in a stable, but you would also keep some of your other equipment in here. You'd keep carriages, you'd keep your plows, and other farm equipment that you would need to keep safe and dry. You'd keep it in the stable. And I don't know if you knew this, but horses, if you owned horses, horses were a status symbol back in the day of the Shirley Plantation. So if you owned horses, you were big stuff.
Hey boys and girls, right behind me you see the James River. As we said earlier in our introduction for Shirley Plantation, this plantation is the oldest one in Virginia, and it started in 1613. Why do you think this plantation is so close to the edge of the river? Well, if you remember, when the settlers came over from England, they came up the James River.
Here you can see the path they took from Jamestown up the James River to where the Shirley Plantation is located. You can see it's very close. It was only about 35 miles up the river.
Well, as soon as the Hundred family, that's what they were called, Shirley Hundred was the wife, and that's why we have the name of Shirley Plantation. As soon as they came up here to the river, they found a nice protected spot, and this is where they made their home.
So look how close the river is to the house. There's the house right there, just a few hundred feet away from the river. And if you'll notice, there's lots of trees around the house. Trees were very important in those days because they didn't have air conditioning, so the trees provided shade. So it was always important to build your house with lots of trees around it.
Hey boys and girls, this is one of the main outside attractions here at Shirley Plantation. What this tree is, it's called Shirley's Willow Oak, and can you believe it? It's been here for over 350 years.
That's almost as old as Brad.
Everybody, welcome to the fields here at Shirley Plantation. And you can see the fields behind us go for a long, long way. And the first people that worked these crops were indentured servants. And indentured servants were people that could not afford to pay their way across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. So what they would do is they would find sponsors like the people here from Shirley Plantation to pay their way over. Once they arrived here, they would have to work to pay off their debt to the people that sponsored them. And then once they did that, then they could go out on their own and found their own farms and plantations.
And by the late 1650s and the early 1700s, those indentured servants were replaced by slaves. When slaves came over to Virginia, they did not get a free passage. Slaves came to Virginia and were immediately used as the labor force in a huge field like this. So what the slaves had to do was work the fields and worked really hard, grueling hours. And then into the late 1700s, the slaves were used for construction to build some of the buildings that you've seen throughout our entire tour.
One of the most important crops of Shirley Plantation was tobacco, and here we are in a tobacco field, so you can see what real tobacco looks like. As you can see, it's broad leaves, and what they would do is when this was ready to be harvested, they'd cut it down, and then they dry out the leaves.
Boys and girls, you've seen a lot of this beautiful plantation today, but in 1862, this plantation looked a whole lot different. That was right when the Civil War was just getting started. Here in Virginia, over 2,000 Union soldiers camped in the fields around this house and plantation. And what happened was, the reason why this house is still up today and was not burned to the ground is because the women of this plantation actually helped care for those Union soldiers.
Here comes Dave.
So you see, boys and girls, if you love your enemies, they will be nice to you. So those women took care of their enemies and they didn't burn down the house. A little value lesson.
Boys and girls, we hope you enjoyed Shirley Plantation.
Hope you realize how important Shirley Plantation was to Virginia's history.
History was important, but we also saw where we can incorporate a lot of science and how they use science over here in this plantation.
And I hope it makes you feel pride in the state of Virginia that we had the very first and oldest business in America.
Well, we have a lot of other places to go trekking, so boys and girls, we've got a long road to go. So come along with us.